I want to talk through this flowchart that I have uploaded to Canvas. This is I think a really good study guide if you understand what I have made. If you don't understand it, then it just kind of seems like maybe some hot mess. So let's take a look at the ideas that I'm trying to get across through this. So some of the main points that we have taken away from this semester are things related to normal distributions, be it finding basic z-scores, using the central limit theorem for means and sums, and then doing hypothesis testing and confidence intervals. Now, this is designed for looking at confidence intervals and hypothesis testing. You need to know how to do normal distributions in the central limit theorem, but that's not covered on this. So when it comes to confidence intervals and hypothesis testing types of questions, these are going to look somewhat maybe similar in nature, and I'd like you to be able to see what the difference is between some of these questions. So what you're looking for each of these is you want to take a look at the first question of what is the question asking for. So at first, are you asking something about confidence intervals? Am I saying at 90% confidence or 95% confidence? What is the confidence interval for this? Am I asking for minimum sample size? So, just what's the smallest sample size necessary? Or am I doing hypothesis testing? Am I testing some type of claim at an alpha level? So depending on which question or which type of question you're asking, you're going to follow through this flow chart here. So let's look at confidence intervals. So if you're looking for confidence intervals, the first question you want to ask yourself is which parameter are you finding an interval for? We either studied this for proportions or we studied it for means. So if it's proportions, you immediately know to use this formula on the formula sheet. If you instead are looking for confidence intervals for means, you have to ask an additional question. Do you know the population standard deviation or not? If you do, then you use this formula that has the z sub alpha divided by 2's and sigmas. If you don't know the population standard deviation, then you go down and use this formula that instead uses t sub degrees of freedom in s's. So if it's confidence intervals, it's going to be one of these three formulas, and this is how you decide which formula to use. Now, if we move on to minimum sample size, this is either going to appear for means or proportions. Either if you're looking for a minimum sample size testing something about proportions, this is the formula that you use. Now, to use this formula, you need to know p dash, q dash, z sub alpha divided by 2, and this e, which is the margin of error. Now, because you're going to be given as some type of confidence, you can find z sub alpha divided by 2. The margin of error will be given to you, but p dash may not be given. So the question is, do you know the sample proportion p dash? If you don't, use p dash equals 0.5. This implies q dash is 0.5 as well. If you instead are looking and you know what the sample proportion is, so let's say there was some preliminary test that was done, you want to use that if it's given or compute it with the given information. On the other hand, back to the top now, if it wasn't proportions and we're studying means and we want to know what's the average of something and what's the minimum sample size, we use this formula here. Now, we go back to the top. If you're looking for hypothesis testing, you need to ask yourself what type of parameter are you doing the test on. So similar over here to confidence intervals, you choose proportions or means. You do the same thing with hypothesis testing. If you're looking at means, you have these two questions again. Do you know the population standard deviation or not? If you do, this is the process that you want to do. But the important part here is that you want to use the z-test. If you don't know the population standard deviation, you again go through these steps, but the key step is that you need to use the t-test. And then for proportions, then again, you follow these steps, but the important part here is that you're using the one proportion z-test. All of these other statements here are exactly the same. You say your hypothesis. Here you're using mu because that's the population parameter. For means, for proportions, p is the population parameter. Then For all of these, you want to be finding your test statistic and then the p-value. You compare the p-value to alpha, and then you either reject or do not reject the null hypothesis. So those last two chapters are often the two most difficult chapters for students. So hopefully this flowchart helps you process through it in at least the way my brain does, to be able to know, how do I even know what formula to use, or what type of hypothesis testing do I want to be doing in this situation?